First of all, could you lay out what is the international protection environment as you see it today? What has changed over the last year?
We have seen a number of changes over the last year. First of all, the numbers have grown immensely. We are talking about almost 60 million people recorded as people who fled either conflict, violence or persecution. We have seen a number of countries that unfortunately have gone down the road of restricting access to territory by, for instance, establishing fences, walls, by adopting restrictive policies, by using a security narrative that does not do justice to the reality of people on the move, but also by increasing detention practices. The other phenomena that we have seen is that people move on, and they are not just moving from their country of origin, Syria for example, to the neighboring countries. They actually, after long years in exile, or because of desperation, or because they want to reunite with their family members, they move on to other countries.
Now, in your speech you talk of a crisis of values. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, there's a lot of talk about crisis. There's a crisis of numbers, and there's a crisis of admission, and there's a crisis of reception, and various other crises. But underlying the 51 conventions are fundamental principles of humanity, of dignity and respect and compassion. And when I see the discussions taking place now in the media and sometimes among politicians, I wonder whether these values are not being questioned in the way that they adopt policies. So I think I would see it more as a crisis of values than anything else.
Is one of these values in crisis the ability of countries to work together to address these problems?
It's clear that countries have to engage with each other, have to show solidarity, have to trust each other, and have to work together to deal with the problem of movements, but also with the people that are affected by it, and find solutions together. That's the only way, that's the only answer to what we are seeing unfold today.
In your speech you refer to populist politics as being one of the preeminent dangers at the moment. How is that playing out? Is it becoming an increasing threat?
Populist politics, inflammatory speeches, the fact that some of the elections that we see take place, for example in Europe, but not just in Europe, also elsewhere, that they are essentially built on fear, or creating fear, on creating sensational reports about masses of people coming, or the unmanageability of it, is part of, unfortunately, very grim political games that are at the expense of the citizens first and foremost, but also obviously of refugees in this case. And so I think some of the biggest threats that we see today is precisely that. How to counter simplistic messages that actually are not going to be the solution to the problem. How to counter xenophobia and racism, and how to counter attitudes that are averse to what this world has built up over decades, not least as a result of a horrific experience that the world had during the Second World War.
You mentioned prominently in your speech the need for a new global compact to deal with protection needs of refugees, internally displaced, stateless and other communities, but how realistic is that notion in today's troubled environment?
There's always an opportunity in the crisis. I think countries have realized that they cannot resolve issues in isolation or to the exclusion of their own interests. They need to work cooperatively together in order to resolve an issue that is fundamentally international in scope and in character, such as the refugee issue. So I think there might be an opportunity for countries to realize their own self-interest by coming together, discussing ways and means more predictably, more visibly, to share burden and responsibilities when it comes to addressing refugee flows. So that's what this global compact is about.
We've spoken about the threats to the protection of refugees and others in need of international and national protection, but what about the positives? There's been a lot happening in Europe, for example, that speaks to more acceptance of refugees.
One of the most amazing things that I've seen over the last couple of months in Europe is the outpouring of sympathy and the groundswell of support for refugees from all walks of society, private citizens, NGOs, civil society actors, opinion leaders, the media, and I think that's very heartening to see that, because quite frankly in the past I've seen that mostly in the most poorest countries on earth, where people who had lost everything were able to share whatever they had with people who came across and had to flee into their countries. I saw that in Tunisia, I saw that even in the Central African Republic, I saw that in South Sudan. I was really heartened by the fact that there is this mobilization of goodwill by people who are touched by the stories of refugees, who want to understand why they are here and why they need to come, and who support them. This people-to-people solidarity is really what we need to work on, that this indeed is not the exception but the norm. And I have the impression that there is a real change in public attitude and civil society attitude in many countries in Europe, and it's extremely important that we stress and honor that in all its manifestations.